About a month ago, I started building Starship in Minecraft. The reason has a lot to do with this video, where Tim Dodd, aka the Everyday Astronaut, announced that he was selected as a crew member for Dear Moon. I probably won't be talking about that in this video, so I highly recommend checking his video out. But that was basically all the inspiration I needed to start the build. With that being said, here's some history of where I got started. Starship has been a concept for quite some time now, but I first heard about it back in 2016 when the Interplanetary Transport System was revealed as a fully reusable, super heavy lift launch vehicle consisting of 2 stages, with the primary goal of putting the first humans on Mars. These details would remain much the same even to this day, but ITS specifically was extremely ambitious with something like 12 meters in diameter and 122 meters tall between both stages. ITS was also almost entirely carbon fiber to save as much weight as possible and could potentially lift up to 300 tons of cargo into low Earth orbit. However, it wasn't long until this design would change. In September 2017, at the 68th annual meeting of the International Astronomical Congress, Elon Musk revealed a new launch vehicle known as the Big Falcon rocket, or just BFR, which greatly dialed back the design, reducing the diameter to 9 meters, the height to 106 meters, and featured a small delta wing at the rear that supposedly extended the flight envelope, which would in theory allow BFR to land in various different atmospheres. The design went under multiple revisions, including a change of material from carbon fiber to stainless steel, and eventually so did the nomenclature, which gave rise to Starship Super Heavy. To be perfectly clear, the lower stage or booster is known as Super Heavy, and the upper stage or ship is known as Starship, but together they're also known as Starship, which can be confusing, so I usually call them by ship or booster and only Starship when referring to the full vehicle. In December 2018, the first Starship prototype vehicle known as Starhopper was spotted, and in July 2019, it performed a 20-meter hop, making it the first flight of a full flow stage combustion engine, which in this case is the Raptor engine. A few more short hops would occur with full-scale Starship tank sections, but on December 9th, 2020, SN8 flew on the first high-altitude test flight and successfully flew to a height of 12.5 kilometers, reoriented, performed a controlled descent, and again reoriented for touchdown, but due to some issues, this flight profile would alter slightly between flights and was reattempted 4 more times with SN9, which failed due to an oxygen pre-burner failure. SN10 was mostly successful, but ultimately failed due to a variety of reasons. Although SN10 did technically land in one piece, just before touchdown, 3 of the 6 total crush core landing legs meant to cushion the landing failed to open, which led to an extremely hard landing clearly visible by this bounce at touchdown, which also led to a tank failure. SN10 stood leaning at the pad for just about 8 minutes before it finally gave way to the pressure. SN11 was sort of a mystery, at least to me. It took off for its test flight through dense fog, and the SpaceX live feed was extremely choppy. We eventually lost telemetry at T plus 5 minutes and 49 seconds with this final frame before the rocket disintegrated in midair. The last of these flights occurred on May 5th, 2021 with SN15, which was basically a total success. If you've never seen any of these flights, I highly recommend this video explaining SN8's flight, or just about any of the videos by Scott Manley covering the launches. They're really good. On August 6, 2021, Ship 20 was stacked atop Booster 4 on the Orbital launch mount, completing the historic first ever full stack of Starship, and placing Starship as the new tallest rocket ever built. As of now, the current pair of vehicles slated for the maiden Orbital flight is Ship 24 and Booster 7, which are the 2 I chose to build. In terms of the Minecraft version, I built one in creative first as a Pathfinder, and then I finally built one in survival, which I actually completed. I tried to build everything as accurately as possible at as near to 1-to-1 as possible, so I went with the launch tower located at Starbase in Boca Chica, Texas, instead of the launch tower at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, due to a lack of abundant imagery, which I so heavily relied upon throughout the building process. I did change some things like the exact location of the OLM, the interior of the launch tower, and some measurements may be off, but for the most part, I think I did pretty good. I don't think I have to tell you this, but the Minecraft version doesn't work, but we'll dissect the table of contents with the real version in mind anyway. First off, we have the Orbital launch mount that we've briefly glossed over. The overall design has changed a lot since I started building, which is evident by these screenshots, but this new version is a lot better looking if you ask me, and it's also a lot more accurate. While not functional in the slightest, I used hoppers to emulate a water deluge system, and below that on the pad I used campfires alternating between hay bale and no hay bale, sitting below bottom slabs. The rest of the base around the pad will likely be a work in progress long after everything else is done, just because terraforming is so time consuming. Also on the OLM is this black box, which is the booster QD or booster quick disconnect. Keep that in mind for future reference, by the way. The booster QD is an umbilical system that supplies the booster with propellant and internal power prior to liftoff. Moving on to the launch tower, or more extravagantly, the Orbital Launch Integration Tower 1, which is 155 meters tall, not including the lightning rod, and via elevator has 26 floors. I experimented with a water elevator at first, but not only did it sacrifice the looks, it made getting onto specific floors a nightmare, so I just went with scaffolding. Of course, if you have wings, there's not much of a point to actually use it, but I suppose there's some novelty. The first arm on the launch tower is the ship QD arm. The QD arm itself is the black part, but the actual umbilical interface is this weird looking stone structure. But trust me, it looks weird in real life too. The whole ARM and QD setup was probably the most painful part about the whole build in general. It's not the most simple shape in real life, so working diagonally on all axes was just awful. It was even worse in survival, and since it's made of black concrete, it's pretty hard to tell what's going on in screenshots, so this is what my reference photos would usually end up looking like. On the bottom are these grabber things that hug the booster in order to gain a stable connection, and of course, just like the booster QD, the ship QD supplies propellant and internal power to the vehicle prior to liftoff. Sure, the ship QD arm isn't the most accurate, but it was definitely the biggest hurdle in the building process, so as soon as I found a satisfying build, I just ran with it. Above that is a blank space that I at some point filled with a crew access arm. This isn't a feature on either the Starbase launch tower or the Kennedy Starbase launch tower, but since Starship will play an integral role in NASA's Artemis program as the lunar lander, and as SpaceX's own goal to put humans on Mars, crew access is definitely in mind. Obviously not at this point though, Starship is still very much under development. Anyways, I decided to go without it. Above that are the chopsticks, or in layman's terms, the catching arms. The CS arms are pretty unique to this launch tower and serve a few purposes, such as the ability to lift Starship on and off of the OLM, as well as to catch the booster, as the name implies. In real life, the CS arms are black, so the closest representation of that color in Minecraft is of course black concrete, but when gathering reference screenshots on the Pathfinder model, you might as well be using a totally different block because there is no way in hell you can decipher what is going on in these images. Thankfully, there's a lot more useful imagery and diagrams regarding the chopsticks, so I didn't have to work quite as hard as I did for the ship QD arm, but it was still very annoying to build, especially in survival. I have them built in the open position that they'd be in for launch, but of course in real life they can open, close, as well as slide up and down the launch tower along tracks. We've already gone over Starship, but I wanted to point out how I achieved the engine bay on the booster, and some other little details you may have missed. Super Heavy, or in this case Booster 7, in real life is equipped with 33 Raptor engines, all kinda crammed in, and my solution was to use the bottom of cauldrons. It technically isn't perfect as there are more than 33 cauldrons here, but if we compare this to the exact same view in real life, it looks pretty damn good, and if you're wondering, I didn't add an engine bay for Starship. In fact, the whole vehicle is totally hollow. I added the COPV covers along the sides of the booster. I also added the hold down clamps for the booster on the OLM, and I even added the extra heat shielding around the flaps and nose cone, which is realistic due to plasma cutting around uneven surfaces, which SpaceX has already accounted for, as well as the SpaceX logo on Ship 24, which I represented here with buttons. The vast majority of the build is on the grayscale, so I ended up using a good amount of the practical gray blocks the game has to offer. In terms of block choice, specifically the launch tower was pretty bad because I figured that using clay and cyan terracotta would offer the most realistic look, But clay is just annoying to get in large quantities, and the green dye needed for cyan terracotta is like 40,000 blocks away or something ridiculous. Thankfully, Floor built a colossal cacti farm near my house at my request, as well as supplied me with all of the deep slate I needed and more for the heat shield. So again, thank you, Floor. It does kind of suck that by default the maximum server render distance is set to around 7 or 8 chunks, which means you can't actually see the full build when standing at the bottom. But apparently some client-side mods and shaders can extend the render distance, as seen here by a video from Floor. In the future, I may or may not build the rest of Stage 0, but that's up in the air right now. For now though, not including the ongoing terraforming and lighting, the build is done. If you want to come check it out and you're on the server, just go through my portal, which is connected through the Nether Hub, exit my house, and travel northwest across this river to these quartz. Once again, if you're interested in the test flights I mentioned earlier on, or Starship in general, I made a playlist of some really good videos, linked in the description. As you can probably tell, I could really go on forever talking about it, but that's probably not what you came for, so we gotta leave it at the cliff notes. With all this being said, that's all I got.